Welcome back to Studio Time and another episode about the template. And in this episode, we're going to talk about all the instruments in the scoring JXL scoring folder. The last episode was about all the JXL instruments. If you haven't seen that, go back to that. The episode before that was talking about the writing tools and the drums. If you haven't seen that, go for that. And the first episode was about the utility tracks and the way that I use them in my template. So now we are at the scoring folder. In this, so this is the folder. Let me close it. It wraps it all up. And then what we see on top is JXL instruments. I'm just going to open it back up. The first folder that really matters is the string department. So the first instrument that I have up is Berlin strings. I use this one a lot. It's really good at fast runs. And you also see here, I have it set up with expression maps. And expression maps are these puppies right here. I spent forever building these. And there's a separate episode that goes in just talking about the expression maps and how you can set them up yourself. I've done this really properly now for my template. Before that, I knew how it worked, but now I really dove into it, and I'm going to make a video for you how to build expression maps in Cubase, and it will be a one-stop shop. Everything you need to know about expression maps. So that's a future episode. So Berlin strings we have right here. It goes all the way down to sustains, blah, 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 spiccato, pizzicato in an ensemble form. The next string library over is east-west. Let's see, at this point, it is set to the long notes. I usually use the short strings of the East-West Play library. Again, all these samples have been heavily treated and processed. And I mix them with the Berlin shorts that have a very direct sound. It's also a smaller group. And the combination between the two sound actually really nice. I've shown that in one of the Dark Tower episodes. If you haven't seen that, go check that one out. So East-West, we go through a bunch of different instruments. Then there's still some really old library stuff in there from East-West. They sound like so good and so gritty. Again, these samples are heavily treated to give what I want out of it, but that's all fine. All set up with expression maps, separate episode about that. Then the next folder over is LASS harmonics. I really like the sound of them. There's only three of them, the viola and violin and cello. Next folder over is cinematic strings, the library of choice for legato stuff. And as you can see, the way that I have set it up, this is like a monophonic line. So if you want to write in harmony, you have to write one melody line over here. You have to write another one over here, which is the divisi. And then you have the second violins over there. Second violin's divisi. You have the viola here, viola divisi. You have the cello there, cello divisi. And then you have the basses here. So that together then will be a proper string arrangement. And so everything in the template is more or less set up like this, monophonic lines. And if you want to write divisi, you just got to go to a separate track. And I process the second track like differently, so it feels like it's something else. It's also smaller in size. Underneath that, we have the new cinematic strings library. The first one is really heavily processed and put together by myself. The second one is pretty much how it comes out of the box. And I'll play you the difference. So that's that, and then this is that. Even though I did processing on the return of the new cinematic library to get a little closer to what I did on the original one, still the original one is my favorite. There's a couple of articulations in the new library that are actually really good that I like. The tremolos are pretty good. And the pizzicato too. Next one over is the cinematic strings, solo strings library. Nice sounding library. Still, I would say that the perfect library for a smaller string or a solo string still needs to be invented. I feel it's good, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Then I have the Spitfire LCO strings. They're okay. I use them every now and then. So this is a poly thing in nature. So there's a, you can program it like that. Don't use this too often. I have done on a few occasions, but not too often. Next one over is the ATO Cage string. Now, I think this is a pretty good library. Again, I did like a lot of processing on it to make it sound the way that I want to sound, but I think it's a good library, and I do have a huge amount of string effects myself that I made myself, and that's what we find all here. And brass actually too, especially the brass ones I'm really proud of because they have this really interesting color. It's a really thick cluster with microtuning. Again, these string effects tracks, like all my tracks in the library, is more or less a pointer. Hey, go look for that library over there and load your own instruments that you want. I just made a selection here, but there's hundreds and hundreds of them that are ready at all times. Then we get to the Woodwinds. Berlin Woodwinds is the library of choice. It sounds really good. We use it a lot. Have to say though that Woodwinds never end up in my final mix together with the live recordings. It's always either or. I explained that in one of the previous tutorials. Strings and brass sometimes can be combined together very successfully, I would say. But Woodwinds is a big problem. So I would highly recommend not to do that. So we have our flutes. We have alto flute, oboes, English horn, E-flat clarinet, two more clarinets, bass clarinet, bassoons, and contrabass bassoon. Underneath that, we have the Spitfire low winds, which actually I really like, and there's not a lot of really deep sampled low woodwind libraries out there, so I use these for that. Then we have the Spitfire BML winds that I don't use that much, that often. So I like actually the instruments that are called Claire Lyrical, where you can switch between natural, soft, medium, and medium 2. You can actually make some really natural phrasing with that. So that sounds pretty good if it's the right piece of music you're writing. So we're going through the flutes, then through the oboes, the English horns, the clarinets, the bassoons, and then I still have in here the very, very old library that East West did like 18 years ago or so. It's still something that I like. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. The newer libraries outperform it by far when it gets to performance and making it sound natural. But there's a good quality to that old East-West library. Heaviosity Forzo, actually, I should say, which is a brass library. It's okay. I wouldn't say it's fantastic. It's great on the softer bits. Not as good on the loud parts. Cinebrass is the library of choice that I use. Also here, I heavily process the original samples, so it sounds completely different than coming out of the box. really big sounds. But still, the issue that I have with Cinebrass is that it doesn't go quiet enough. It does loud really well. The staccatos are not that great. But overall, it's a useful library, and especially the way how I processed it. It works actually really well. We just scroll through the brass section right here. So here we get to the trumpets, Cinebrass, and then cage trumpets, which is extremely aggressive, but sometimes it can be handy. The bones, cage bones, old East West bones, actually they have something to them that I really like. They're very soft. They're very soft, actually. They're so soft, you can't even hear them. That's how soft they are. I'm sure there's a connection with one of the V cells not right. Doesn't matter. So we move down, Cinebrass, bones, bass bones, monster brass, tubas, some native instruments. Oh, actually the native instrument trumpet sounds really good in the legato. It goes really from really soft to really loud, like that really nice brightness in trumpets that I miss in so many other brass libraries. But then the staccatos sound terrible. So there's like up and down with each brass library, and that is exactly the reason why I'm building a brass library myself, because there's room for so much improvement. That more or less brings us to almost the end of this template, because now we're going into the choirs. The first choir that I have up is the Dominoes choir. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with that, but these are just the vowels. They're all set up with expression maps, so you can pick whatever you want. Phrases. So I think Dominus did a really nice job doing that. There's a couple of issues with building the phrases, and that you can quickly go to another set of phrases, but hopefully they'll work on that in the future. But it's pretty cool. Again, all set up with expression maps. So we'll get into that in a separate episode. Lacrimosa choir, the males, and then the females also set up with all these different articulations that they have. Very effective library, somewhat limited in the sounds that you can make, but very effective and really good sounding. And it's usually the library of choice that we use to mock something up before we then record it with a real choir. So that concludes the scoring instruments. Also, these instruments, I want to wrap this up. All these instruments are sometimes heavy and sometimes not heavy, processed and then just repackaged and used in the way that I want to use. Half of these libraries are commercial, half of them are something that I tweaked myself or built myself. Other than that, it's a very straightforward orchestral setup of tracks. It's just like all together with the special project instruments, with the Junkie XL instruments, and now the scoring instruments. We're looking at a huge amount of tracks, MIDI tracks that are up here. We're talking like probably 1,500 to 2,000 MIDI tracks, and then another 1,500 roughly VST returns that we'll look at in the separate episodes when we focus on the mixer. There's one thing I want to say about this main window and the arranger window. I'm not going to do a full tutorial on Cubase, but the only thing that I do want to point out, which is really great, is your configuration setup right here on the left. And I have it set to main window. I can click another preset that I made, which is just audio and VST instruments, and that's all I'm seeing at this specific point. So I'm not seeing any of the other MIDI tracks of the orchestra, or I just select just the MIDI tracks. And now it's going to take a second because it needs to rebuild the screen. But now we're just seeing the MIDI tracks, and not surprisingly, all this is template stuff that goes to an external VSL machine. So it will not show you anything internal audio, internal VST instruments that you load specifically for this project. Now we go to the main window where technically everything is on. So have a look at that if that's useful to you or not. It is useful to me. And then you could also have all these buttons and key commands that you use. So if, let's say, there are tracks here and tracks here and tracks there, and something here and something over here, something there, something there, something there. I'm just like drawing some random stuff here. And now we can say, okay, show me just the tracks that are on the cursor. So now I do data by cursor. And now, boom, it's going to show me just the tracks under the cursor. I do on hide all. Now the full template is coming back. It takes a little bit because there are thousands of tracks. So now we do data by locator. And now we just see the parts that are within the locator range. So this is a very quick way for me to navigate like through the tracks that are being used in this arrangement. One more thing to say about the setup that I have, which is this touchscreen. This touchscreen is nothing potentially more special than what you already have on an iPad or on your iPhone, if you will, or another touchscreen, even though this is fantastic software written by Mark Wary, who works for Hans Zimmer. And it allows you to completely customize this thing however you want, which I did. But then at the end of the day, it is sending key commands and certain macro commands or logical preset commands to Cubase. So you can set that all up in the preferences. So on hide all, data by cursor, and data by locator are not free functions that are that I built in this touchscreen. It's technically a setting that you do in Cubase, and that it listens to a certain command, and then you create these buttons and then it does all that stuff for you. So I would definitely look into that, how you can navigate your session a little bit smoother, you know, with something like this. There are a couple of really cool buttons that we have, which is fixed velocity for every note that is there. So let's say I'm opening this MIDI part, and then there's a bunch of notes here. Then with this button, I can say, make them all fortissimo, make them all mezzo piano, make them all pianissimo, make them all forte, or whatever you want to do. Then there's things like buttons, lower everything by 10%. So there we go, lower everything by plus, and then they go up. There's things like compression that I can do on velocity. I can do the same thing for my mod wheel, for expression information and volume information. I have all these cool functions here that I can copy data back and forth between separate lanes. If I bring up my standard lanes, let's say I have expression here, but I want to copy that to, for instance, my mod wheel information. I click this button and boom, it's done. And then, for instance, I can delete this. And now I can say, you know, I want my mod wheel information to go to the volume. Boom, it's done. Oh, I want it back to expression. Boom, it's done. So these are all like very handy functions that you can build into Cubase, into the logical editor that Cubase has. And then you could make all that really fluid the way that you want it. For the template that you have, because every template is different. So I hope this run through my template, at least on the arranger side of things, the arranger window side of things, was helpful for you guys. And opening this back up, so now we see our utility tracks again that were hidden. And in the next episode, I'm going to talk about the mixer window, a little bit about the processing that I did, and also a little bit how I've set up my windows in there to navigate everything a little quicker. So I'll see you next time on the next episode, which is the last episode on this template. Thank you.